The gunfire was deafening, the stench of burning ozone heavy in the air. Nathaniel Ward crouched behind a jagged alien outcrop, sweat dripping down his face. His pulse hammered in his chest, matching the rhythm of the blaster fire that echoed through the desolate landscape. His team was dead. All of them. No one left but him. And the creatures. A xenomorph stood not 20 feet away, black and gleaming like an armored tank, its head tilted in a way that suggested it was as curious about him as it was deadly. Its long, silvery tail swished like a blade through the air, cutting the silence in between shots. Nathaniel. The voice crackled through his calm, a grating, high-pitched sound. Where the hell are you? It was Captain Monroe, his superior, the last surviving human on their mission. Monroe was probably holed up in a bunker somewhere, safe for the moment. Nathaniel barely heard him. He had to make a choice. His fingers hovered over the strange alien device in his hand, the one given to him by the creature standing just a few feet away. A device he hadn't asked for, didn't understand, but was told would turn the tide of the battle. And the thing that really bugged him? The xenomorph queen who handed it to him said, "No," whispered, in a voice that sent shivers down his spine, "you don't have a choice." At first, Nathaniel thought it was some kind of psych-out, the way a predator toys with its prey. But now? Now he wasn't so sure. The human soldiers had been on the run from the insectoid Z-Con for months. Endless battles, each more futile than the last. The Z-Con were everywhere. You couldn't look anywhere without seeing the thick, chitinous bodies of their soldiers, the sharp, black antennae that flicked in and out of view like insects hunting in the dark, and humanity. Humanity was losing, fast. So here he was, in this hellhole, fighting alongside creatures of nightmares, the xenomorphs, who had once been the very thing humans feared most. Who had once been enemies, as alien and monstrous as could be. Now they were allies. Or at least, partners in survival. There was no going back. Not now. Not after he'd already pressed the damn button. The world around him seemed to pulse for a second, a strange energy vibrating through the ground. The Z-Con paused. Their twitching antennae stilled, their insectoid bodies going rigid. It was a brief moment of silence, the calm before the storm, and then the xenomorphs, his new allies, moved. In a flurry of hissing claws and black carapace, the xenomorphs tore into the Z-Con with brutal efficiency. A hiss. A shriek. A scream. The Z-Con fell, crumpled and broken, their once indomitable swarm scattered. Nathaniel felt a surge of emotion, elation, regret. It was all mixed together. But there was no time to sort it out. He had to move. He sprinted from his cover, through the smoke and the bodies, heading straight toward Monroe's last known location. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. What had he just done? What had they just done? And who was he now? Nathaniel's boots crunched against the dry earth, his chest heaving from the sprint. As he reached the debris-laden entrance of the underground bunker, he saw Monroe's face through the shattered viewing window. "You didn't." Monroe's voice was thick with disbelief as Nathaniel tore open the door, stepping inside. "You really sided with them?" Nathaniel didn't answer. He couldn't. He didn't have a solid reason. He didn't know why he'd activated the device, why he'd let the xenomorphs take control. The choice felt like it had been made for him, but also like the only option available. The humans had been fighting the Z-Con for years. The war had taken everything, families, homes, entire colonies. Nathaniel had lost friends, family, hell, he'd lost his damn self out there. And for what? A lifetime of fighting only to watch it all slip away, like water through his fingers. The xenomorphs had their own reasons. Survival, perhaps. Or something more. The Z-Con had their reasons, too. But in the end, it was all the same, survival at any cost. And Nathaniel had become an unwilling pawn in that game. He sat down across from Monroe, his back against the cool concrete wall. Did you really think we were going to win this thing? He asked, his voice flat. Did you think we'd make it out alive, Captain? Because I didn't. Not after everything we've lost. Monroe didn't answer immediately. He just stared at Nathaniel, like he was seeing him for the first time. You're not one of them, Monroe finally said, his voice hard, like he was trying to convince himself more than Nathaniel. You can't be. Nathaniel looked up at the ceiling, then back at the captain. I don't know who I am anymore. But I do know that if I hadn't made that move, we'd all be dead. Monroe didn't argue. He just exhaled deeply and rubbed a hand over his face. They'll never let you go back. Not now. I'm not sure I want to, Nathaniel muttered. The next few days were a blur of chaotic strategy meetings, broken comms, and endless hours of nervous waiting. Nathaniel spent more and more time in the presence of the xenomorphs, getting to know them in a way he never thought possible. They were strange. Alien. Terrifying. But they were also pragmatic. Driven. In ways that he almost admired. Zyra, the leader of the xenomorph faction, was a different breed from the others. There was a depth to her intelligence, an eerie calm in her movements, that unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. She was, as much as he hated to admit it, a leader. And Nathaniel? He was a pawn. You don't understand, do you? Zyra said one evening, after a mission to reclaim a supply depot from the Zet-Con. You don't have a choice. Her voice came to him in his mind, like a whisper in the dark. At first, he had thought it was some form of mental intrusion. But after a while, he started to realize that the connection was mutual. He could hear her thoughts, feel her thoughts. There was no place for privacy between them, no room to hide. The xenomorphs weren't just invaders from another world, they were, in some ways, as human as the soldiers he had once served with. We all have to survive, she continued, her voice a soothing hum in his mind. And to survive, we must be the apex. Humans. Zet-Con. Us. All of you are simply another stage in the process. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. It was both chilling and strangely comforting. Survival. The only thing that mattered. You think you're better than us? Nathaniel asked, sarcasm lacing his voice. That you can just make us your pawns, and we'll happily follow you into whatever hell you're heading for? Zyra tilted her head. We are not better. We are not worse. We are what you will become if you survive long enough. You just don't realize it yet. The more Nathaniel was exposed to the xenomorphs, the more he began to see the world through their eyes. They had no patience for petty politics or self-righteous moralities. There was only the present moment, the only fight worth fighting, the one that would keep them alive, no matter what. And then, there were the Zet-Con. Nathaniel had seen them up close on several occasions, had even fought alongside them in strange, surreal skirmishes. They were a species of destruction, but also one of deep loyalty. Their queen was a master manipulator, her mind as sharp as any general's, perhaps more so. He could almost hear her thoughts when he was near. They were just as alien to him as the xenomorphs were. But did that make them any less human? Nathaniel hadn't slept for days, and the exhaustion was starting to wear on him, every breath feeling heavier, every thought slower. The war had become a series of blurry images, fractured moments stitched together by gunfire and fleeting memories. The faces of his fallen comrades still haunted him, his best friend, Vargas, who had laughed about getting a tattoo of the earth on his arm after this was all over. That dream had evaporated the moment the Zet-Con had breached the colony. And now here he was, sitting across from Zyra, her alien form looming like a shadow over his thoughts. The hissing breaths of the xenomorphs were a constant reminder of their presence, their power. The psychological weight of it all pressed in on him. He hadn't asked for this. Hell, no one had. But it didn't matter now. It was all about surviving. You think I'm weak? Zyra's voice, calm and unblinking, reached him, slithering into his mind like a serpent. He blinked, almost startled by the question. "No," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. "I think you're right. About survival, I mean. You're not wrong about that." Her smooth head tilted, studying him with a gaze that felt oddly knowing. "You think you have choices. But you do not. Survival is the only real option." She tilted her head again. "The war has a purpose for us all. Your survival is part of it, whether you want it or not." Nathaniel's throat tightened. He stared at her, the churning in his stomach unbearable. "You really believe that? That all of this is just some natural order?" "To us, yes," she said softly, her voice almost maternal, and yet utterly alien. "It is the way of things." Nathaniel wanted to argue, but the words felt empty. The Zet-Con had forced him into a corner, and the xenomorphs had shown him the only way out. That strange device he had activated, the one that had turned the tide of the battle and saved his life, was both a weapon and a leash. His loyalty to humanity had already been tested and found wanting, and now, what was left? What could he believe in anymore? The xenomorphs didn't care about right or wrong. They didn't need to. They operated by instinct, by the raw drive to survive. And in a twisted way, that instinct was starting to resonate with him. Zyra leaned forward, her smooth, black body almost glowing in the low light of the bunker. Her fingers twitched, and Nathaniel realized she was reading him, in a way that went beyond mere words. She was in his head now, and not just because of the connection they shared. She knew him. "You are still human," she said, her tone like a soft challenge. "That is why you struggle with this. You think there is a line, us versus them, but there is no line. There is only what survives." Nathaniel clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. His breath quickened. Was it really that simple? Was survival the only thing that mattered? Was that all he could cling to? His head felt heavy, and his mind raced, spinning through 1,000 questions, none of which had any clear answers. "There's a part of me," he said, staring at his hands, "that wants to believe it's more than that. That wants to believe there's a choice. That humanity isn't just one mistake after another." "You are learning," Zyra said softly, her voice a cool ripple through his thoughts. "But you still resist what is inevitable. That resistance will fade." Nathaniel closed his eyes, trying to push the thoughts away, but they clung to him. The faces of his comrades, of the people he once fought for, seemed to haunt him more than ever. What was he supposed to tell them if they ever asked what he'd become? What would he say to Monroe? To Vargas? To his family, if they could ever look at him again? Zyra's voice broke through his reverie, sharp and direct. "We move tonight. The Zet-Con forces are regrouping. They are not the only threat you face. Your people, the humans, will not stop until you are eradicated. And we," she paused, almost as though savoring the words, "will not let them." Nathaniel looked up. "You want me to help you exterminate humanity?" "No," Zyra's answer was swift, confident. "We will allow you to choose your path. But know this, once you leave this place, there is no return. Your choice will be made. There will be no going back. Not for you, not for them." She was offering him an out, or maybe it was more accurate to say she was presenting him with a truth. A truth he hadn't yet fully understood but could no longer deny. There were no sides in this war. No winners. There were only those who survived, and those who didn't. Nathaniel stood, his body stiff and weary, and walked to the entrance of the bunker. Outside, the sky was streaked with blood-red light, the remnants of a fading sun casting eerie shadows across the wasteland. In the distance, he could see the dark outlines of Zet-Con warriors moving through the smoke, preparing for their next assault. He hadn't heard from Monroe in hours, and that worried him more than he cared to admit. Had the captain made it to safety? Or had he, too, been swallowed up by the chaos of the war? It didn't matter. "Not anymore, you're not afraid," Zyra said, her voice cutting through the silence. "No," Nathaniel replied, his throat dry. "I'm not." "Then your choice is already made." The next day was nothing like the others. It was as if the universe itself had twisted into something unrecognizable. Nathaniel found himself, once again, standing beside Zyra, leading a small team of xenomorphs into the heart of Zet-Con territory. The mission was clear: eliminate the Zet-Con Queen, destroy the last remnants of their leadership, and cement their dominance over the planet. The deeper they pushed into the alien ruins, the more Nathaniel could feel the weight of the decision hanging over him. This wasn't just about defeating an enemy anymore. This was about choosing a future, a side, a destiny. The Zet-Con, brutal as they were, had their own kind of order. Their queen, her image loomed in his mind now, was something more than just a beast. She was a leader. She had a vision. She had a cause. But then there was Zyra. Zyra, whose only cause was survival. Who could not, would not, be stopped. As they moved through the skeletal remains of an ancient Zet-Con temple, Nathaniel's calm crackled to life. It was Monroe. "Nathaniel," the captain's voice was hoarse, strained. "We need to talk. I know what you're doing. But this is not the way. You don't understand what you've done. They're using you." "Shut it down, Monroe," Nathaniel cut in, his voice sharp, biting. "You don't get to tell me what's right anymore. I've seen what's out there. I've seen what we did to survive. This is bigger than you, than me. This is about the future." There was silence on the other end, and Nathaniel knew Monroe was trying to piece together whatever moral argument he had left. He could almost hear the captain's mind working, desperate to pull Nathaniel back to humanity's side. But Nathaniel couldn't go back. Not now. He'd already crossed a line. The war had done that to him. The xenomorphs had done that to him. And what's more, Nathaniel realized with a strange clarity, he hadn't cared. "Not for a long time, we move." Zyra's voice broke into his thoughts again, her presence pushing against his mind like a steady, unyielding force. "The Queen is close. Your choice is now." The choice. It wasn't a choice at all, really. It never had been. The Zet-Con Queen was a symbol, a thing to be destroyed. She represented an end. Zyra, and the xenomorphs, represented a beginning. The beginning of something far bigger than a war. Something that would transcend everything Nathaniel had once known. And as he watched the Zet-Con warriors fall in a brutal and unrelenting wave of xenomorph fury, Nathaniel realized, finally, with terrifying clarity, that survival didn't care about right or wrong. It didn't care about loyalties or morality. It only cared about one thing: the will to live. End.